once you've recorded your audio and uploaded it and written a great headline or title for your episode and great show notes and all those things, and you put it out into the world, the next step is it's got to connect with listeners, right? So it's easy to think that if you create a podcast and publish it, that people will find it and your audience will grow. It's not that easy. So there's a few different ways people find your podcast. And once you know how people find your podcast, you can then take some steps to help more people. You can kind of, grease those skids so more people can find your podcast easily. So this lesson is going to walk you through 4 of the main ways that people find your podcast, and we'll give you an idea or two on how to optimize what you're doing so that each of those 4 ways or 4 channels will bring you listeners easily. Okay, here's a bonus lesson that we threw in here. We want to tell you why Google is such an important piece of your podcast discovery engine. Okay, Google has recently doubled down on their efforts to get podcasts discovered in their platform. In search, when you go to Google, they are working hard to make sure that podcast episodes get discovered. So there's a couple ways that you can work to make it easier for Google to recommend you to new people. Okay, let's walk through those. So one thing to know is that Google is going to listen to your podcast. So when you publish it out into the world, Google somehow, I don't know how it happens, they go out and they scrape every podcast that's ever published, and they have software that basically transcribes it, and they read your podcast that way. So they know what you're talking about on each episode. So knowing that, we can, and then Google's going to get a sense of what your podcast is about as it reads your podcast, and recommend you or not recommend you, based on what it hears or reads in your podcast. Okay, so knowing that, here are a few tips that can help make Google work harder for you. So one would be to say your name during the podcast. So the way I do that is I say, hey, this is Johnson City Living Podcast. I'm your host, Leighton Hart, and this is where we blah, blah, blah. Okay, so make sure you're saying your own name in your podcast. There have been times where I've recorded my podcast and I've completely forgotten to say my name. So say your name somewhere during your episode, hopefully at the front when you're kind of introducing yourself and the topic for the day. Okay, say your episode title also if you know it. So say, hey, I'm Leighton Hart. This is Johnson City Living. The title of this episode is Building a Better Community Through, sustainable business, or, whatever. So say the name of the title, because that will link. Now you've linked the name of the podcast, so Johnson City Living, with the name of the person and the name of the episode. So you're just dropping all these little bits of evidence for Google about what your podcast is about. Also, if you have a guest, say your guest's name and their title. So, hey, I'm Leighton Hart, Johnson City Living. I'm talking with Sarah Smith from ABC Cookie Company. So now, again, you've got Sarah Smith at ABC Cookie Company in there, tied to Johnson City Living, tied to, Leighton Hart. It's all kind of tied together. So it makes it more likely that when somebody Googles Sarah Smith from ABC Cookie Company, that it's going to get linked together. Or Sarah Smith, ABC Cookie Company, Johnson City. Well, all that stuff is out there and it's linked because we said it on our podcast. All right. Also, if you can throw your keywords in there. So let's say I had a show that the keywords were cooking and busy moms. So I would say, okay, I've got Sarah Smith from ABC Cookie Company, and today we're talking about easy cooking for busy moms, or effortless cooking for busy moms. So drop your keywords in there. You could even say, hey, this is the podcast where we talk about, easy cooking for busy moms. We're trying to make life easier for you. So it can sound conversational where people don't necessarily know that you're throwing a lot of keywords at them. So those are some tips. Read the article that we wrote below to really kind of wrap your arms around this. But the tips are: say your name, say your guest name and their title, say the title of the episode that you're releasing, and mention your keywords once or twice in there. Don't overdo it, but just pepper them in there somewhere. And Google will read all that, and it will help them refer you to other people. Once you start your podcast, then we want to work on building a fan base of loyal listeners, and we're going to talk about that right now. So when you launch your podcast, obviously, you want people to listen to it, right? Everybody starts small, no matter who started their podcast, even, the most popular, most successful, the most downloads in the world, even those podcasters started exactly where you started, which was with one episode and at a point where nobody had ever heard it. So everybody starts at the same place, and everybody kind of starts small, and that's okay. But over time, we want to build a fan base of listeners that are loyal and who keep coming back and who love your show, right? And that could be 10 people, that could be 10 million people. We just want you to have the impact that you want to have. So let's talk about the secret to building a fan base of loyal listeners. It's easier than you think, believe it or not. The secret is consistency. And that's probably something you've heard before in other aspects of your life. In podcasting, it's definitely true. The secret to building a fan base of loyal listeners is consistency. The reason that that's true is because consistency builds trust or builds reliability. It builds dependability. So over time, if you're consistent, your listeners will know that they can count on you. In what kinds of ways do they need to be able to count on you? They need to be able to count on when you're going to appear in their player. They're going to need to count on the kind of content that you deliver. They need to be able to count on that what you do is kind of focused and on brand for you. And consistency is how you make that happen. Now, we're going to talk specifically about consistency of publishing, like when you publish right now. And I'm going to give you a few tips for how to do that in a way that doesn't kill you, doesn't stress you out, and isn't overwhelming right as you start your podcast. So what I would say is that in the beginning stages, it's far more important to start small and ramp up than it is to come out guns blazing, posting 3 times a week or every day or something like that. I would bet that you're going to have this desire, especially as you get started, to get everything out, to post as much as you can, and you're going to have this desire to, whenever you feel that urge or like you have something to say, to record it and post it. And so, like I said, that could end up looking like you've got 3 episodes that you could record and post this week. And that's fantastic. I did that when I started my podcast too. What I'll tell you is that is probably not sustainable, because there will come a point where kind of that inertia breaks. So you have that good momentum, and then something happens, and then that breaks. So kid will get sick, get a stomach bug, and you'll need to, devote all your attention to them for a couple days, or something will come up at work that kind of monopolizes all your attention, or something will happen. Your computer breaks and has to go in the shop or something like that. And that momentum that you built up will stop. And then when it stops, it's really hard to get it going again. So you could be posting 3 times a week for 4 weeks. You're absolutely crushing it. And then you go, once the dust settles on whatever's happening in your life, you go to record a new episode, and you're sitting there and you're just stuck. You've got podcaster's block because you don't know how to start or what to say, and that momentum is gone. So easier to start small and ramp up as a podcaster, but then also think about it in terms of the person who's listening to you. If the person who's listening to you is getting your stuff 3 times a week, they've built it into their schedule, they know to look for you on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and that's part of their daily drive, or when they're folding laundry or whatever, they're looking for you at that time, and then you vanish. It doesn't build that element of trust, and they'll probably move on to something else. They'll listen to something else. So start small and ramp up. If you think you want to have a weekly podcast, I would recommend that you start posting every other week or twice a month, whatever works best for you. And then see how that actually works in terms of your actual real life schedule and in terms of this sustainability of it. If that feels like a pace you can manage and you feel like you can scale that up easily and add in, an episode, in the silent weeks and the intervening weeks, then do it. Then you can scale up to weekly. If you start weekly and then scale back to twice a month, well, your listeners are going to get a little bit confused about what's going on, and they may, like I said, they may bail. They may just find something else to listen to. So that's the first tip there is start small or start slowly and then ramp up. I would recommend start at 2 episodes a month and then work up from there. Okay. Second tip is pick a day to publish and stick with it. The day I publish is on Wednesdays. I don't know how I settled on Wednesdays, but somehow I settled on Wednesdays, and that's the day I publish. So even if I record an episode on Thursday, I'm not going to put it out. Like, that episode is going to wait until the following Wednesday to come out. Also, it means if I record on Tuesday, then that episode is probably going to come out the next day. So pick your day and stick with it, because again, you want to train people to depend on you, and you want to train people to look for your content at the same time every week. It builds trust, and we tend to like people that we can trust, and we tend to share things that we trust. So if you want to build that trust with people, pick a day that you publish and stick with it. Okay. The third tip, this is kind of a sustainability tip or a way that you can build consistency into your schedule, is to batch your episodes and record multiple episodes at one time. So we have a new podcast that we brought on board here at Market Street Media, and these are busy professional people and don't have the time to come in every week because they have very busy 9-to-5 jobs. And what they do is they block off on one day off that they have during the month that they know that they can get together. They block off 3 hours and they record their shows for the next month during those 3 hours. They do 2 episodes a month. So they're knocking out 2 episodes in those 3 hours, one day a month. And they've got a podcast that comes out twice a month, and they're just rolling. They record it all, in one shot, in one, booking in the studio here. So that's something you can do too. If you want to have a weekly podcast, you could sit down and record, 4 episodes in one day, and there you've got a month's worth of content. Also, if you have a daily podcast, you could sit down on, Sunday afternoon and record your podcast and then schedule it out for the week. Daily podcasts are hard to do. The rule of thumb that I would introduce to you here is, I'd call it the 90-minute rule. After 90 minutes of sitting down behind a mic, working and putting something out, you're going to be fatigued. You're going to be really, really tired because it just takes a certain amount of mental labor to record a podcast. Even if you're sitting back as an interviewer, you're simply asking questions and the other person does the bulk of the talking, it's draining. It takes a toll. And after about 90 minutes, you're not going to be putting your best stuff into the world, and you really want to put your best stuff into the world. So do yourself a favor, and if you are going to batch these recording sessions together, cut yourself off at 90 minutes. So if you typically have a podcast that runs 30 minutes, that gives you time to record 3 episodes. If you have a longer podcast, you're probably only going to be able to get the 1 episode or 2 episodes in during that 90 minutes. But if you have a daily podcast, and a lot of people do this, where they have, like a little 5-minute or 10-minute inspiration, meditation, motivation, or here's what's going on type podcast, well then, yeah, you could definitely do a week's worth of podcasting in one 90-minute session. So that's the tip, is record several episodes in one batch, but limit it to 90 minutes if you can. We want you to have the very best stuff out there. So that is the secret key to building a fan base of loyal listeners: consistency. Consistency, because consistency builds trust. Okay, that's it for this lesson. We'll see you in the next one. Now let's talk about some techniques to grow your podcast that are a little bit more advanced. Not super complicated, not hard, but maybe a little bit more advanced. This may not be where you want to start your efforts to grow your podcast, but these are great things to layer in over time as you get your feet underneath you, as you get really competent and confident podcasting. These are great ways to kind of reach more listeners, potential listeners. Okay, so let's walk through these. Number one would be video. Number two would be influencers. And number three would be guest podcasting. Let's walk through those one by one. All right. So video is a fantastic way to grow a podcast because not everyone is in the right spot to listen to a podcast. Some people want to be able to see what they're dealing with and what they're taking in. And other people just, that's their primary method of consuming content. They're not going to put their earbuds in and listen to a podcast, but they will watch a video. They'll watch 40 videos a day, but just don't listen to podcasts for some reason. And you still want to reach people that might, be a good fit for what you're putting out there. All right, so there's a couple different ways to add video to what you're doing. Number one would be simply set up a camera, like your phone, or if you have a webcam or video camera, just simply set up a camera when you start your podcast, click record, do your thing, record your podcast, and then when you're done, click stop, take that video and post it to YouTube or to Facebook or someplace like that. So you are recording what you do, and then after the fact, you're uploading it to a place like YouTube or Facebook where people can consume it after the fact. It's funny, we have some podcasters here who come in, they record their podcast and do that. They film it and post it later, and they get this many listens, by people tuning in to podcasts, listening to it, and they get this many views, this many views on YouTube and Facebook. For whatever reason, these people have audiences that prefer to watch. So they're there for the content. They're down to take in the content, but they prefer to watch it rather than listen to it. So that's the first way, is record it, post it later. The second way is to live stream. And live streaming can be very intimidating to people, and I get it. I understand, because there's that, this is live. What if I mess up? What if I stumble? It really doesn't matter. Now, even making these videos that are recorded, I've stumbled a few times. I've messed up. These are not perfect videos, but we're getting the message across, and you understand that I'm human and doing the best that I can, and hopefully the value of the content that I'm delivering will gloss over any stumbles or mistakes or anything like that. I would say the same is true for live video. Like, people are tuning in just to see you, see what happens, see what you're really like when things aren't so polished. And so all you have to do to do live video while you record, and people love this. We have podcasts where people will tune in like crazy when there's a live stream on Facebook. Just click Facebook Live, put the camera on yourself, and set it up right before you start recording your podcast, and I guarantee people will watch. People will tune in for that. If you want to take it to another level, you can keep that phone close by while you're live streaming, and you can check for comments, you can check for questions, and that way you can incorporate those people into your show, and they're much more likely to come back and listen to that episode that you've recorded when they know that they've participated in that show in some way. So that's live streaming. So we've talked about recording and then posting after the fact, and we've talked about live streaming. The great thing about live streaming is there's really nothing that you have to do after the fact. Once you click stop on the live recording, you can, I think, click one or two other little places on the Facebook screen, and it'll post it to your page, and you don't have to mess with it again. Now, you can go in and edit the title and dress it up a little bit, but you're not having to download something and then upload it somewhere else and set up titles and all that stuff and tags and categories and all that stuff. So live streaming is a low maintenance way to do video. Okay. The third way to incorporate video would be to record what you do, record your podcast like the first way, and then take clips of that, take little excerpts of that, and post those to social media to kind of generate interest or generate buzz, generate some excitement or anticipation for the episode. So you're giving people a little preview of what's going to happen in the episode. So that's the third way, little clips that you can use as previews to build interest or excitement. And then the fourth way would be to create what's called an audiogram. So an audiogram doesn't have, it's a static background, which just means it's the background stays the same all the time, and usually it's a graphic. You could put the logo for your podcast. You could put your picture up there, and what an audiogram is over that picture, it will have the audio of your podcast playing. So if somebody goes to Instagram and pulls up that audiogram, they'll see a picture and then they'll hear your podcast playing. And usually there's like a waveform running in front of it. So, you can see as people get louder, it spikes up. You'll see that waveform in front of the picture, and you can do that with like a 30-second or minute-long clip to post to Instagram. You can actually, using the Headliner app, you can do an audiogram for the whole episode. And some people choose to consume that way. So that's an audiogram. So now you have 4 ways that you can use video to find new listeners and deliver your content to listeners in ways that may be more preferable to them. So that's record it and post it after the fact, live stream it, post an excerpt, or post an audiogram. Some people do all 4. Some people just choose one that they're comfortable with. I personally really like live streaming. It's a lot of fun to me. It feels very natural. It doesn't feel forced. I don't get nervous. But other people have different preferences and opinions and things that they like, obviously. Okay, so that's video. The second advanced growth technique would be influencers. And I write in the lesson here, I really do encourage you to dig into the lesson because sometimes I write better than I can speak on video here. The term influencer kind of gets a bad rap sometimes. So if I say influencer, you may have a certain image in your mind of what an influencer is. And I think Instagram has hurt the word influencer for us. An influencer is somebody who has a following, a loyal following online or in real life. So think about and how you use this as a growth strategy would be guests on your podcast. It's always good to pursue what's true to your podcast, what your topic is, what your subject matter is, what your style is, and what the format is. And so if that means that you do monologues, that's great. That's not a problem. But if you have an interview show or like a panel roundtable talk, one way that you can grow is to incorporate influencers, people with loyal followings online, into those discussions. So you can use them as part of your guest strategy. So you can invite them on to be interviewed on the show or incorporate them into your panel talk. The benefit of having somebody on who has a loyal following is that they may and probably will promote their appearance to their audience as well. So if I have a podcast and I'm getting, a couple hundred listens a week and I have 1,000 followers on Instagram, that's great. I'm doing great. And those people like what I do. But if I bring on somebody who has 10,000 followers on Instagram and a YouTube channel that does 10,000 views every time they post a video, and they promote me, I'm likely to get a bump in listenership and new listeners because they promoted me. So that's the benefit of having an influencer on. Again, use that word simply to describe somebody who has a loyal following online. It's not necessarily a certain look or a certain whatever. Somebody with a loyal following online. If you incorporate those people into your show, it's very likely that they will share with their following. Okay, the last one is guest podcasting, and I really want you to read about guest podcasting in the lesson here because I actually have the thought process behind it, how you approach it well, and a template for pitching people to be a guest on their podcast. Guest podcasting is simply you appear as a guest on someone else's podcast. I've done this before. It's a ton of fun flipping the mic around because normally I'm the one sitting down and interviewing somebody else, and it's really a ton of fun having somebody interview you and ask you questions and tell your story. So there's a way to approach that I think is gracious and humble, and I think those things are important, and that's written in the lesson. So go check that out. So advanced growth techniques are use video, incorporate influencers, and be a guest on other people's podcasts. If you can work that out, and I really think you can because I've put that mentality and the workflow and the template in there for how to approach that in this lesson. So check that out. Now let's go see what's going on in the next lesson. Okay, now that we're talking about podcast growth, I'm going to jump into the frame here. The best marketing for every episode that you publish is your next episode. And let me tell you what I mean. When people tune into your podcast and listen to it for the first time, if you exceed their expectations, meet or exceed their expectations while they're there, they're going to want to hear more from you. And so they're going to go look for what else is available. So let's look at how your listenership and the number of listeners that you get, and then also the number of listens that you get on each episode grows over time, and how it really is true that the best marketing for your last episode is the episode that you put out today. And I'll show you what that means. Okay, so let me show you my graph, my chart here. We have episodes. You have episode number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. So these are just the number of your episodes that are in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. Up here we have the number of people who listened to that show. So you put out your first episode, you had 10 listeners. That's fantastic. And I'm just going to show this growing by 2 every time. So you get 3 new listeners the first week, and then it just goes up by 2. Then I just wanted to use nice, simple numbers here. So you put out your first episode. That's fantastic. And the next week, when you put out your second episode, you get 3 new listeners. So something must have happened. So either you promoted it again on social media, or these listeners shared it and some other new people checked it out. So you got 3 new listeners, and now you're up to 13 people out there who are checking out your show. Now, these people have tuned in for your second show, but these 3 people are going to go back, most likely, and listen to that first episode. The next week, you didn't get 3 new listeners, you got 5 new listeners. And so you're up to 18 total listeners now, which is, again, great. You're doing great. You're only 3 weeks into this. And these 18 people are going to go back and listen to this episode and this episode to see what you're all about. The next week, again, just grows by 2, and so you bring in 7 new listeners that week. You're up to 25 listeners now, and all those new people are going to go listen to this, and you can see what's happening here. So 9 new listeners the following week, and then those people are going to go listen to this, and this. So this is the compound effect of putting out new stuff. This is why we've mentioned that consistency is so important, because if you keep doing this and if you keep bringing in new listeners, here, 1 new listener will account for 2 listens, right? Because there's only two shows for them to listen to. Here, every time you bring in 1 new listener, that's 9 people that are going back and they listen to this show and this show and this show and this show and this show. So that's 45 new listeners or new listens. So every time you bring in 1 new listener, you're getting 5 listens on your show, which is fantastic. That's the compounding effect. So imagine if you had 100 episodes and that was 1 new listener brought you 100 listens, because they're going back and they're binging everything that you've ever made. I've done that. When I find something that I really like, I go back and I listen to everything that person has done. So this is really important. This is a really important thing for you to keep in mind as you make your show. The best marketing for your show is the next episode that you put out. So you want every new episode to be just a touch better than the last one that you put out, because it will invite people, it will stimulate people to go back and listen to everything that you put out so far. Okay, that's it for this lesson. We'll see you again. A lot of us start podcasting because we simply love the idea of having a platform to share a message and just talk to the world, or grow our network, or promote an idea or a cause. But, wouldn't it be cool to make a little money from your podcast? There are people who make a fortune from their podcast. They're few and far between. I don't think that's realistic for everybody, but it is possible to make money from a podcast, and that's what we want to talk about today. Number 1 would be direct sponsorship. So a direct sponsorship is where you as the podcaster find a company, a brand, a cause that is similar and aligned with what you promote and what you talk about and what your audience is into, and you strike up a deal where you read a sponsorship or an ad about that company either at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of your show in exchange for money. So let's say I have a cooking show and there's a bakery in town, and the bakery thinks it would be a good idea to be in front of my audience because that might generate business for them. So we work out a deal that says, okay, at the beginning of my show, I'm going to read a 30-second ad, and you're going to pay me $25 to do that. And boom, just like that, you have a little income stream from your podcast. So that's direct sponsorship. Second way would be through a sponsorship marketplace. I always get tongue-tied on that. Sponsorship marketplace. And what that is, probably the largest, most established, most recognized sponsorship marketplace would be Podcorn. Now, that's a silly name for a business, right? But what Podcorn is, it's almost like a matchmaking service. So as a podcaster, I can go on Podcorn, set up a little profile and say, okay, I have a cooking show. I talk about baking and cooking, and that's what I do. This many people listen every week, and this is what kind of that audience looks like in terms of demographics. And then so that's the podcaster side. On the brand side, brands can come to Podcorn and say, all right, we have $10,000 to spend on podcasts for the next 2 months. We want to be on as many shows as possible if they're in this niche. And so let's say there's a premium cookware brand that comes to Podcorn to place some sponsorship dollars. Well, I can, as a podcaster, I can browse all the listings, and if I have a cooking show, baking show, then I can see, hey, this premium cookware place might be a good fit. And so I can bid on a sponsorship with them and say, hey, I'll promote your premium cookware at the beginning of every episode for $25. I'll read the ad, and the cookware business can look at it and make a match with you, and then you go from there. So that's a marketplace. The benefit of the marketplace is you don't have to be out on the streets, beating the bushes, hitting people up for sponsorships if that's something that you're just not into. You didn't get into podcasting to do that. Maybe that's not your skill. So you can just do it all online. The third way would be affiliate income. So affiliate income works like this. So let's think about this. I have a cooking, baking podcast, and let's say there's a cooking school in town. And what I can do is I can go to an affiliate relationship would be where the cooking school is going to pay me a little share of revenue for every new student they sign up. So I can strike up a deal with them that says, hey, I'm going to talk about you on my podcast, and I'm going to send them over to you with this promo code, Leighton's Baking Podcast. And when people come over with that promo code and sign up, you're going to cut me in on that. So if they have the tuition is $100 over there, they'll cut you in for $20 or $30 or $40. You get some of their revenue that comes back because you're their sales force basically. You're promoting them. They're not having to promote and market. You're sending them business, and to thank you, they're going to send you some money back. So that's affiliates. The fourth way would be, in this course, we're advocating that you should set up your podcast on Anchor. There's a lot of reasons to do that. One great reason is that immediately, as soon as you open your Anchor account and publish your first episode, you have a sponsorship waiting right there for you through Anchor. And Anchor will give you a script to read. They'll tell you exactly what to say and exactly how to start their sponsorship. And so you basically read their script and say, hey, I host this podcast on Anchor because it's so easy to use. There's all these tools built into it to make an amazing sounding podcast. And then you post that in your show, and based on the number of listens that episode gets, they're going to pay you based on that. So, and it may be only, $1 or $2 or $5 or $10, but still it's better than nothing. And the ad stays in there, and the more listens it gets over time, the more revenue it generates. So those are the 4 ways that you can monetize a podcast. You can turn a podcast into an income stream, either through direct sponsorships, sponsorship marketplaces, affiliates, or sponsorship straight from Anchor. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the course, and we are so proud of you. You did a good thing. Hey, if you need to go back and watch one of the sessions again, you can click down in the description. We've got them all linked up down there. Or if you want to just go back and start from the very beginning and run back through the material, you can just click that box right there. That one. That's the box. Right here.